From the book of Daniel, chapter 8, verses 1 through 27. In the third year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared to me, Daniel, after the one that had appeared to me at first. In the vision, I was looking and saw myself in Susa, the capital, in the province of Elam, and I was by the river Ulai. I looked up and I saw a ram standing beside the river. It had two horns. Both horns were long, but one was longer than the other, and the longer one came up second. I saw the ram charging westward and northward and southward. All beasts were powerless to withstand it, and no one could rescue from its power. It did as it pleased and became strong. As I was watching, a male goat appeared from the west, coming across the face of the whole earth without touching the ground. The goat had a horn between its eyes, came toward the ram with the two horns that I had seen standing beside the river, and it ran at it with savage force. I saw it approaching the ram. It was enraged against it and struck the ram, breaking its two horns. The ram did not have the power to withstand it. It threw the ram down to the ground and trampled upon it, and there was no one who could rescue the ram from its power. Then the male goat grew exceedingly great, but at the height of its power, the great horn was broken, and in its place there came up four prominent horns toward the four winds of heaven. Now out of one of them came another horn, a little one, which grew exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the beautiful land. It grew as high as the host of heaven. It threw down to the earth some of the host and some of the stars and trampled on them. Even against the prince of the host, it acted arrogantly. It took the regular burnt offering away from him and overthrew the place of his sanctuary. Because of his wickedness, the host was given over to it together with the regular burnt offering. It cast truth to the ground and kept prospering in what it did.
This is the horn. They have an opposable phone. Opposable phone.
This is a very talented horn.
Pick up, draw. I never imagine horn being disrespectful. Like,
That's the one with the horn in the mouth. A couple chapters ago. Are they?
oh, you're not done.
Right,
Nope.
right? Okay, it just has a weird thing.
Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to the one that spoke, "For how long is this vision concerning the regular burnt offering, the transgression that makes desolate, and the giving over of the sanctuary and hosts to be trampled?" And he answered them, "For 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the sanctuary shall be restored to its rightful state." When I, Daniel, had seen this vision, I tried to understand it. And then someone appeared standing before me, having the appearance of a man, and I heard a human voice by the Ulai River calling, "Gabriel, help this man understand the vision." So he came near where I stood, and when he came, I became frightened and fell prostrate. But he said to me, "Understand, O mortal, that the vision is for the time of the end." As he was speaking to me, I fell into a trance, face to the ground, and then he touched me and set me on my feet. He said, "Listen, and I will tell you what will take place later in the period of wrath, for it refers to the appointed time of the end. As for the ram that you saw with the two horns, these are the kings of Media and Persia. The male goat is the king of Greece, and the great horn between its eyes is the first king. As for the horn that was broken, in the place of which four others arose, four kingdoms shall arise from his nation, but not with his power. At the end of their rule, when the transgressions have reached their full measure, a king of bold countenance shall arise, skilled in intrigue. He shall grow strong in power, shall cause fearful destruction, and shall succeed in what he does. He shall destroy the powerful and the people of the holy ones. By his cunning, he shall make deceit prosper under his hand, and in his own mind, he shall be great. Without warning, he shall destroy many, and shall even rise up against the prince of princes. But he shall be broken, and not by human hands. The vision of the evenings and the mornings that has been told is true. As for you, seal up the vision, for it refers to many days from now." And so I, Daniel, was overcome and lay sick for some days. And then I arose and went about the king's business. But I was dismayed by the vision and did not understand it. The word of the Lord. Okay, so I'll go through the story and talk about some of the cryptic parts, at least enough to make sense of what we might draw out of this. At least one thing. So as Gabriel said, which interestingly, this is the first time in the Bible that an angel is named. And Gabriel, we have Michael and Raphael and Michelangelo. No, that's the Mutant Ninja Turtles. But this is the first time. So Gabriel is giving him some of the translation or interpretation of this vision. The ram and its two horns are the Medes and the Persians. The kind of through this vision get a history of the nations in power from the 5th century BCE to about the 2nd century BCE. The Medes is the shorter horn because it is shorter in time. It's not as powerful as the Persian Empire that follows, which is the longer horn. And the ram, the language of it charging westward and northward and southward. Well, so Daniel's in Babylon, and so it's he's and that's east in the Middle East, like modern day Iran, kind of. And so he's describing the movement of this empire into the west and into the north, up to Asia Minor maybe, and into the south down into Egypt. He's describing the expanse of its territory. And then this he-goat, it needs to be male, I guess. But this goat with the little horn between the eyes, this is Alexander the Great. In the middle 4th century BCE. And it describes the goat as like moving so fast it doesn't touch the ground. The thought is that it's running so fast, it's barely touching the ground. This empire is spreading so fast and quickly. That was one of the things about Alexander the Great, is that he conquered a heck of a lot of stuff in a really short amount of time. And again, the movement westward and eastward and southward, it's describing the extent and expanse of his territory. So that great horn, it says it's broken suddenly. That's because Alexander the Great died suddenly in 323. Unexpectedly, he died. His life was cut short. COVID. Yep, it was the pre-pandemic pandemic, or as Pat Kiefert would say, the plague. That's the correct way to talk about it. So in Alexander's place, his kingdom split up into 4. The 4 horns that emerged. Those are the 4 Seleucid kings, and the Seleucid dynasty they're related, but they basically divide and conquer and take up these 4 different territories. And out of those 4 territories, the little horn that gets so much attention and is so anthropomorphized and talented and versatile, that little horn is Antiochus the 4th Epiphanes. He's a gnarly dude. He is, huh?
He's a horn that did a lot of stuff.
He is a little horn.
It's a children's book.
on this Greek Hellenizing force. This he-goat, he's the little talented horn. And the reason that he's so significant and appropriate is because, and scholars think this, I think this makes sense. Really, the whole book of Daniel is about this little horn. The whole book of Daniel is about Antiochus the 4th, because he is the one that sacks the temple. He's the one that removes all of the holy objects out of the temple. He's the one that ends Jewish festivals and special religious observances. He's the one that Hellenizes the Jewish people. And we know this because of First and Second Maccabees, which are that they just got cut out of our Bibles. They're in the intertestamental literature between the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament, and they tell the story of the Maccabean revolt, which is about 170s to 160s BCE. That's when Antiochus is in power. That's when he overtakes the temple, and he basically he's trying to spread Greek culture and religion and practice cultural genocide of the Jewish people. And the Jewish folks are beside themselves. They're distraught. They're traumatized. Antiochus is violent. He's a pretty terrible dude. I think the whole book of Daniel is written sometime before the end of his reign. The whole book of Daniel is filtered through how long is this oppression going to last? And I found an interesting text in Maccabees that I want to read. And can you put up the picture, Ryan, of in the slide? You were going to ask a question, Miles?
Yeah, so does that, I was just trying to place that for the. Well, that works if it's in here, or is it? Yeah, fair, okay.
Ryan Miles is using the mic. I don't know if that matters to you back there. Does he need to click the button? Okay.
Maybe now?
Yep.
Yep. So I was just trying to, so in this, if that timing lines up and it makes sense, would that be after they've rebuilt the walls and returned to Jerusalem? Is this still during the exile period?
Okay, so great question. So yes, it's in the middle of the 5th century, the Ezra Nehemiah story, that's when Israel returns from Babylonian captivity. The time of Daniel, precedes that, obviously. So what this is, it's basically using the story of Daniel retrospectively to anticipate and speak into this current experience of oppression in the 2nd century BCE, nearly 300 years later. It's like, let's take a prophetic figure from our past and let's upload into his world visions of our current situation, and like, what would the prophet Daniel have to say about what we're currently experiencing? Daniel was in exile. Daniel was in captivity. The people of Israel were in oppression then. What happened then that might speak to our current experience of oppression now under Antiochus IV? Yeah,
that makes sense.
Yeah.
In the same way, there was a book about the 1919 Spanish influenza outbreak that became very popular in 2020, as people were reading about the ways that society broke down then, how people handled their grief and loss.
Yeah.
That I think people used as a way of understanding what we were going through now. So
Yeah.
I was just thinking,
That's a
just
great
trying to
connection.
modernize that.
Yes. But yeah, it is that. Thank you for that question, because it helps to show the gap. Like, we have the book of Daniel and the setting of Daniel, but it's actually composed. I mean, maybe those stories are in existence, certainly in exile and as Israel returns, but somebody is taking this lore around Daniel and they're fashioning it 3 centuries later for religious and prophetic purposes in the context of the oppression of Antiochus IV and the Maccabean revolt and all of that.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
I'd always put Daniel as earlier in my mental timeline because of the stories
Yes,
of where that happened. So that's
and it is earlier,
right.
but yeah, it is.
The stories are earlier, but the writing
That's right.
based on this hypothesis would be later.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Interesting.
So yeah, it's less in that vein. It's less like predictive, in the sense that Daniel is guessing all of this stuff that's happened. I mean, there is still some guessing happening, like
Mhm.
what's going to happen with Antiochus? Like, is he gonna decimate us? And like, hey, can we channel some of Daniel in that story for our current purposes? This is Antiochus the Fourth, and the right is the sacking of the temple. That's a depiction of his. He's the guy in the middle, over all of the
It's hard to recognize because we have a note.
slain bodies. Yeah,
Yeah.
it occurred to me, I think the reason his nose was broken off is because he had in the coins, the coinage that were created with him, that had a goddess of victory on one side and his face on the other. He has a really long nose, which is the same reason genitalia breaks off in ancient, right? It's the stuff that breaks off because it's easy, it's the most fragile, right?
Hmm.
Anyway, that's my theory as to why we probably don't have his nose. It's the same reason lots of statues don't have the hinterlands. So
Have the horns.
so little horns, big horns. Golly, did I just say that on Zoom? Yeah. Hi, Ballards. Hope y'all are well.
Immediately very self-conscious that I'm sold.
This is a text from 2 Maccabees 5 about Antiochus that kind of corroborates the context of Daniel. When the news of what had happened in Jerusalem reached Antiochus, which there was some revolt and activity, he thought the whole country of Judea was in revolt, and he became as furious as a wild animal. And so he left Egypt, where he was in battle, and he took Jerusalem by storm, giving his men orders to cut down without mercy everyone they met and to slaughter anyone they found hiding in their houses. They murdered everyone, men and women, boys and girls, even babies were butchered. 3 days later, Jerusalem had lost 80,000 people, 40,000 killed in the attack, and at least that many taken away to be sold as slaves. But Antiochus was still not satisfied. He even dared to enter the holiest temple in all the world, guided by Menelaus, who'd become a traitor both to his religion and to his people. He's one of the priests. With his filthy and unholy hands, Antiochus swept away the sacred objects of worship and the gifts which other kings had given to increase the glory and honor of the temple. So this is a devastating, horrific moment in the history of the people of Israel, that the story of Daniel is helping them to grapple with this moment. And the big question, the question of this vision, the question of this book, I think, is how long? For how long? How much longer is this oppression? Excuse me. Oh dear.
Ew.
Just release some impression right there.
Ah.
I thought you were gonna unload right into the microphone.
How long is the question? How long is this going to last? Not unlike the Psalm, Psalm 13, a famous Psalm of lament. How long, Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts and day after day have sorrow in my heart? How long will my enemy triumph over me? That's the prayer, that's the lament, that is the question of this chapter and of all of Daniel. And it strikes me, he does get an answer to this question, and I don't know how exact or symbolic it is, but the number of days, 2,300 and something, is about 6.5 years. But we ask the same questions, right? I mean, we're asking the same questions as we read Daniel. How long? How long is homophobia going to cause abuse in families? How long is depression and anxiety going to cripple us? How long will my physical body be in disrepair? How How long will structures in our city disadvantage people at the margins, people of color, unhoused people? How long will we feel exhausted and stretched too thin? How long before we're not in the shadow of this terrible plague that we've survived? How long is to ask, how is God at work in the world amid all of this? Is God at work? Will God accomplish God's purposes? Will God's will be done fully on earth as it is in heaven? What are you asking how long about right now?
I feel like I'm not really asking how long because I'm just assuming it's gonna be forever.
Hmm,
I'm like, yep, so it's gonna be like this.
hmm.
It's hard for me not to think about Camille, Emma's friend, and all that she's enduring, and just when she was disowned, essentially, and her parents took everything. It's traumatic and awful, but on brand, like not unexpected as far as what often happens to
Mhm.
kids when they come out to their Christian parents. But the events of last week are still hard to even fathom. In this sense of, okay, I couldn't imagine that could happen. What's next?
Yeah.
So it's both how long and then what's next.
Mhm.
And then secondly, and I hope y'all know me well enough to know the spirit with which I say this, but I spent a few days last week with some ministers in Churches of Christ. Many of them are younger, and like listening to them talk about church issues, I couldn't care less. I cared about them, but the things that the church is concerning itself with at large, I'm like, how long are we going to have these conversations? How long are we going to keep doing things? Like everyone knows we're all in trouble, right? Kingdom of God isn't, but the church definitely is. But like, let's just keep doing what we've always done, just louder. And trying to be present with them and listen, but also at the same time, this, really? We're still doing this? Okay. Oof. Well, good luck.
Mm.
Selling insurance isn't bad either.
Mm.
Mine is similar, not so much specifically about the like the establishment of the church, but just these like the I don't even know how to put it into words, but just kind of like this kind of holier than thou attitude within, like, that I see with a lot of Christians with issues that they've just decided, well, duh, like you're supposed to think this way, and anything that, and I'm just like, yeah, how long do we have to have these conversations, or not even conversations, that don't get to like knowing people and like having a relationship with them and walking with them through hard times. Like, this is not just issues. These are, these are people. And yeah, similar thinking about like the situation with Emma's friend. And then I was talking with my sister about this another kind of situation. And it's just like, these people aren't making these choices just because they wake up one morning and go, I think I want to turn my entire life around and make everybody hate me. And doesn't that sound like fun? Like, like, and that's the choice they have. Like, that's, yeah. So.
Thank you all for sharing. One of to the same question about how long, I guess one of the questions for this story and this vision and this text is, what is God up to? Where is God in the midst of all of this? And I noticed a few indications in this story, like it's suggesting some things about what God might be up to. In one thing is actually a little troubling in terms of what God's up to. In verse 19, talks about understanding this period as a period of wrath. And Maccabees, the book of Maccabees goes all in on this. And it's not, so the idea being like, it's really hard. This word wrath is always used for God's wrath. So it's not somebody else's, it's not Antiochus's wrath, it's God's wrath. And it's not God's wrath directed against Antiochus and the Greek Empire, it's God's wrath directed at the people of Israel. It's the line of thought in the prophets about Israel is in exile because of their sins, because of their idolatry. God is allowing this to happen because Israel has forgotten its covenant. And that's part of the imagination that Israel has about why it's in the stuff that it's in, is that God is disciplining us. God is frustrated with us. And it's troublesome because it allows, at least according to 2 Maccabees, 80,000 folks to die as a result. That's not the only tradition in the Hebrew Bible or in the scriptures. We do have the wisdom tradition that says not all suffering is God's discipline and wrath. Some suffering is just chaos. It is unexplainable. But it's just unavoidable that this thread about God's activity and God's discipline, but it's not for the sake of, it is disciplinary. It is like to return to wholeness. That God's intent is to allow suffering to occur so that restoration can be possible. But the circumstances through which that happens in this story are pretty horrific. So I hold that with no small amount of discomfort. I think part of what's at play in the wrath thing, the upside of it is it's a way that the Jewish people and the people of God can say, even though Antiochus is doing this horrible stuff to us, this is still happening within the bounds of the sovereignty of God somehow. Like God is not absent from all of this. God sees what's going on. Antiochus is ultimately a pawn in God's scheme, and not God's own self. Antiochus is finite and limited, in the same way Nebuchadnezzar was and Darius was. And that's part of the function of like looking back through Daniel is, what does Daniel's experience in captivity say about where we are now? Well, those kings, the Medes, the Persians, look how temporary they were. Israel outlasted them. We were okay then. We survived that, and we can survive this now. There is good reason to ask how long, because that came to an end, and maybe that will be true now. it was interesting to me too, that the wickedness and violence of human authorities also has an impact on heaven. Like part of the way it describes Antiochus's work is he's pulling stars from the heaven. Those are symbols of the divine council. He is he even assaults the prince of princes, God's own self. God suffers in this story. God is wrapped up in the fate of he's not removed from the harm. When the temple is sacked, when the symbols are taken away, when everything is shut down, God feels the distance. He feels the hurt. His own divine counsel is harmed by the actions of Antiochus the Fourth. It doesn't resolve the God's activity as discipline and wrath, but it does, like, God isn't he isn't totally removed. He's in the fray, he's in the midst of it. And then the final thing, I mean, in the big picture, the thing that Israel's holding on to is that we can ask how long, because there will come a time when this suffering comes to an end, when sacrifices will be restored, when communion with God will open up again. And it's that hope is being spoken in the midst of that how long, in the midst of this terrible experience of oppression. I'll wrap up with an experience I had this week in Rochester, Michigan. I went to a conference called Streaming at Rochester Hills. Rochester University is the name of the institution. It's affiliated with Churches of Christ. It's a small school up there, and there's some great people up there who are thinking about what does the church look like in the midst of the current realities we're facing. Feels like our kind of people. The theme of the conference was mission in the age of crisis. And what does mission in an age of crisis look like? In the age of a plague, in the age of racial injustice. There was a presenter about ecological and environmental justice, which was mind-blowing. We talked about religious trauma, all of the crises. And that seems like the reason I liked it is because it feels different than what I imagine those ministers in CMI were talking about. Like that stuff seems like really important. And those are the kind of crises we should be talking about. And the theme of the conference was kind of framed around midwifery and birth workers and being in the pangs of childbirth. And so maybe this feels like a lot of death, but what if these are birthing pains? What if something is being born in the midst of this? And that's the language of Romans 8, that creation is groaning in birth pangs. Even in all of the decay and all of the trouble, that something in all of the pain, something is being born. Even in the risk of death, even in the risk that death could be born, that stillbirth could be a possibility. There are, what if these birth pangs are something being created and formed? And part of what we did was we wrote down on Post-it notes things we lost in the last 2 years, and we put them up on a board and just like looked at them. And it's just a list of how longs, and a list of great sorrows. The moment of hope for me was at the end when Wayne Beeson, who is a preacher in the Detroit area, he preached a sermon out of Isaiah 43. And Isaiah is writing similar to, exile marks so much of the Hebrew Bible. Isaiah is writing to Israel when they're in exile, they're in captivity, just like Daniel, just like Israel in the time of the Maccabees and under Antiochus IV. And so they're still in captivity. And Isaiah in chapter 43 says, behold, I'm doing a new thing. Do you not perceive it? I'm making a way in the wilderness. I'm bringing up streams in the desert. And it's essentially speaking to, there's going to be a time of deliverance that's coming. You're going to be freed. In fact, I'm doing that new thing right now. And what caught me and what Wayne observed was God's renewing work, God's birthing work is not dependent on our ability to perceive it. It's not dependent on our ability even to participate in it. God can be doing a new thing even when we struggle to perceive how in the world God might be doing a new thing. Do you not perceive it? And like, even if you don't, I'm doing a new thing. And there was something hopeful to me in that, because sometimes I struggle to see it. Sometimes my answer is, no, I can't perceive it. I can't perceive it. But man, I want to hold on to the possibility that even if I can't perceive it, even if it seems like we should give up on the question of how long, because it seems like it's going to be forever. Maybe even in that, even in our lack of being able to perceive it, that God is creating a way in the wilderness. God is doing a new thing. That's all.
So what you're saying is that DC Talk knew all along.
Let's all stand and sing in victorious, triumphant worship.
So a couple things. Listened to a podcast a couple days ago, new Anderson Cooper, All There Is. It's stunning. It is essentially him processing through the grief of losing his mother recently, and connected to, and going through all of her stuff. And connected to that is he lost his dad when he was 10, his brother by suicide when he was 23. And so he's finding his brother's stuff and his dad's stuff and working through all that. So he had Stephen Colbert on, and you have to, it's just one of the most brilliant, beautiful articulations of grief and loss. And they're connected, Anderson and Colbert, because Colbert lost his dad and two brothers when he was 10 to a plane crash. And Colbert quotes Tolkien, who said, there is no punishment from God that isn't a gift. And he talks about the gift of grief and the gift of loss, not in the evangelical, God's making a flower out of this, or that there's some bad, but he says to exist is a gift. And so I receive all of life as a gift. And what happens in grief and what happens in loss is you're able to experience fully more what it means to be human. And the gift then is you get to be present with those. Out of that loss, out of that experience, you then get to be present with those who experience it themselves. That the gift isn't the thing itself, but the gift is the capacity to then be with other people in their own sense, so that they're not alone in those moments. And I was thinking of Christian Wyman, a brilliant book called My Bright Abyss, where he comes back to faith, not because he believes God, but he realizes it's the absence of God that brings him back to faith. I can't remember who said it, but thirst is the best evidence of water. So it's this sense of wondering where you are, God, that creates the possibility that there is a God.
Being angry with God, you have to
right. To be angry at God, there has to be one, right? Yeah. But thinking about
Got me.
this space of how long assumes and has as its foundation that God is there and doing something else. And so I think connecting those two Colbert's and then Wyman stuff is that this experience, if anything, gives us an opportunity to sit with our neighbors who are wondering the same things around other stuff. Not that we have the answer of what the next thing is. This is your empathetic witness.
Yeah.
This is that God sits in that how long.
Yeah.
Very words of Jesus himself. And that we get to embody that to our neighbors who are experiencing the same thing. Not that we know what the answer is or what the new thing is,
Yep.
but that we're not alone in this.
Yeah.
And that to me, I feel hope today for the first time in a long time.
Huh.
It's fleeting.
Yeah.
It'll be gone.
Enjoy it while it
I'll have-
lasts, man.
I'll have something to eat, but I'm grateful for it. Yeah.
Yeah, right
I-
on. Thank you.
I heard Anderson Cooper on Smart List this
Yeah.
week. It
Oh.
was really great. It was a really great episode, but he was talking about how he started going out to war, those places as a teenager, because it was like those are people that were having like this is real stuff, as you know, because he'd had all that loss in he was like, I wanted to go to places where things felt real. I mean, this is my version of what he said, but he said it more eloquently, but it was really interesting. I'm
Yeah.
thinking about it's like I wanted to just
People in grief were his people.
Yeah,
It's like, I
exactly.
gotta go find my people.
yeah. They felt more like real than
Yeah.
So anyway.
Mhm. Interesting.
Also,
that's
also
hopeful to
I
me too.
looked at that podcast list, and the next episode is called Sadness is Not the Enemy. And I was like, is there like a more like Enneagram title for anything for life?
Okay, well, let me pray and we'll wrap up. God, I do believe you're here with us in our midst. Even in our struggles to perceive what you're up to. God, I want to hope that you are doing a new thing, that you are giving birth, that you are midwifing new creation. God, I want to believe you're big enough to hold our frustrations and discomfort with wrath and with suffering and with just gratuitous violence and trauma. I don't get it. God, would you lead us into the lives of our neighbors, into the lives of our loved ones, as we've been invited to share in the grief and the questions of how long, and to hope for something new, to hope for your work in the midst of crisis, to see openings for it and how we might participate in it. Would you give us grace? Would you meet us in the midst of that work of joining and empathy and witness? In Jesus' name, amen.